The morning of the interview dawned gray and drizzle-heavy, as if the weather itself was conspiring against Sarah Martinez. She stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, trying to smooth down her unruly dark hair with water from the leaky faucet. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes betraying the sleepless nights spent preparing for this opportunity. Today was the day that could change everything, the final interview at Meridian Corp, one of the city's most prestigious consulting firms. She had made it through 3 grueling rounds of interviews, surviving cuts that had eliminated hundreds of other candidates. And now only 33 remained for the final selection. Sarah carefully laid out her interview outfit on the bed. The same navy blue suit she had worn to every interview for the past 2 years. The fabric was beginning to show its age, slightly faded at the elbows and knees, but it was clean and pressed. She had spent her last $20 at the dry cleaner to ensure it looked its best. Her white blouse, though not the crispest, was spotless and professional. But as her eyes moved down to her shoes, her heart sank once again. The black leather pumps, once her pride and joy when she had purchased them 3 years ago for her college graduation, now told a different story. The left shoe had a visible tear along the side where the leather had finally given way after countless job interviews, networking events, and long walks when she couldn't afford bus fare. She had tried to repair it with black marker and even attempted to glue the torn edges together. But the damage was unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was interviewing for a position that would finally give her the financial stability she desperately needed. Yet she couldn't afford to buy new shoes for the interview. Sarah had been unemployed for 8 months after the small marketing firm where she worked had closed down due to the economic downturn. Her savings had long since evaporated, going toward rent, groceries, and keeping her phone connected so potential employers could reach her. She had sold her car, her jewelry, and even her textbooks from college. The torn shoes were just another reminder of how far she had fallen from the ambitious graduate, who had once believed that hard work and determination were all she needed to succeed. As Sarah made her way to the Meridian Corp headquarters, she tried to keep her torn shoe positioned so that the damage would be less visible, walking with a slight limp that she hoped others would attribute to nervousness, rather than her attempt to hide her footwear's condition. The building rose 47 stories into the gray sky, all gleaming glass and steel, representing everything she aspired to be part of. The lobby was filled with marble and modern art, and as she approached the elevator, she noticed the other candidates for the first time. They were everything she wasn't. The women wore designer suits with perfect tailoring, their hair styled by professionals, carrying leather portfolios that probably cost more than Sarah's rent. Their shoes were pristine, expensive, clicking confidently across the marble floor. The men were equally polished, their suits clearly bespoke, watches glinting gold and silver on their wrists, briefcases that screamed success and privilege. Sarah felt like an imposter among them, acutely aware of every worn thread and faded patch on her clothing. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt eternal. Sarah positioned herself in the corner, trying to make herself as small as possible while studying the other candidates. They spoke in confident tones about their previous positions at Fortune 500 companies, their MBA degrees from Ivy League schools, their connections in the industry. Sarah had graduated summa cum laude from a state school, had worked her way through college waiting tables and tutoring other students, and had exactly 0 connections in the corporate world. Her qualifications were solid, her work ethic unquestionable, but in this elevator full of privilege and pedigree, she felt her confidence crumbling. The waiting area outside the interview room was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, while abstract art adorned the walls, and leather chairs were arranged in perfect symmetry. As the candidates settled in to wait their turn, Sarah chose a seat slightly apart from the main group, hoping to avoid too much scrutiny. But her hopes were quickly dashed when she crossed her legs, and the torn shoe became visible to several nearby candidates. The whispers started almost immediately. A woman in a burgundy suit with perfect blonde highlights leaned toward her companion and made a comment just loud enough for Sarah to hear about, people who don't respect the process enough to dress appropriately. A man in an expensive charcoal suit glanced at Sarah's feet and smirked, shaking his head as he turned to whisper to another candidate. The laughter was subtle at first, hidden behind hands and disguised as coughs, but Sarah could feel it building around her like a wave. "Did you see her shoes?" came a whisper from behind her. "I mean, I understand being nervous, but this is Meridian Corp. not some startup in someone's garage. The comment was followed by more suppressed laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She wanted to explain that she had been unemployed for months, that she had sold everything of value she owned, that these shoes had carried her through dozens of interviews where she had been rejected not for lack of qualifications, but for lack of connections or experience or simply bad luck. But she knew that any explanation would only make things worse, would mark her even more clearly as someone who didn't belong in this world of privilege and plenty another candidate. A woman whose handbag probably cost more than Sarah had earned in her last month of employment, made a show of examining her own pristine stilettos. "I always say that shoes tell you everything you need to know about a person," she announced loudly enough for the entire waiting area to hear. "They show respect, attention to detail, personal standards. I mean, if you can't manage to wear appropriate footwear to the most important interview of your career, how can you be trusted with client relationships or major projects?" The comment elicited nods and murmurs of agreement from several other candidates, and Sarah felt herself shrinking further into her chair. The worst part wasn't the comments themselves, but the way they made her question everything about herself and her presence there. Maybe they were right. Maybe her torn shoes were a sign that she didn't belong in this world, that she was fooling herself by thinking she could compete with these polished professionals who had never known financial struggle or uncertainty. Maybe the torn shoes were just the visible symbol of all the ways she was inadequate for this position. All the ways she would never measure up to the standards expected at a company like Meridian Corp. As the morning progressed, and candidates were called in one by one for their interviews, the commentary about Sarah's appearance continued. Some of it was whispered behind hands, some of it was communicated through meaningful glances and smirks, and some of it was spoken just loudly enough to ensure she could hear every word. A man with silver cufflinks and a watch that probably cost more than Sarah's college tuition made a comment about how some people clearly don't understand corporate culture or professional standards. A woman in a designer suit that fit her like it had been painted on wondered aloud how anyone could show such disrespect for such an incredible opportunity. Sarah tried to focus on her preparation, reviewing her notes about the company, practicing her answers to potential questions, reminding herself of her accomplishments and qualifications. She had graduated at the top of her class, had increased revenue by 30% at her previous job, had led successful projects, and received glowing recommendations from her supervisors and clients. Her work spoke for itself, even if her appearance didn't meet the standards of her fellow candidates. But with each whispered comment and barely suppressed laugh, she felt her confidence eroding further. When her name was finally called, Sarah stood on unsteady legs, acutely aware that every eye in the waiting area was on her as she walked toward the interview room. She tried to walk normally, but the knowledge that everyone was watching her torn shoe made her gait awkward and self-conscious. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting up again, comments about how she was clearly in over her head, and speculation about what she was thinking coming here like that. The interview room was even more impressive than the waiting area, with a massive conference table surrounded by leather chairs and walls lined with awards and accolades. At the head of the table sat Marcus Chen, the CEO of Meridian Corp., a man whose reputation for brilliance and demanding standards was legendary in the industry. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of quiet authority that filled the room. Beside him sat the HR director and two senior vice presidents, all of whom looked up as Sarah entered. As Sarah walked across the room to take her seat, she knew that her torn shoe was visible to everyone at the table. She saw Marcus Chen's eyes move briefly to her feet, and her heart sank. Here was the moment where her opportunity would disappear, where the months of preparation and hope would crumble because of a $30 pair of shoes that she couldn't afford to replace. She waited for the dismissive glance, the subtle indication that she wasn't what they were looking for, the polite but final rejection that would send her back to the unemployment line. But Marcus Chen's expression remained neutral, professional, giving nothing away as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice calm and measured, "thank you for taking the time to interview with us today. I've been looking forward to our conversation." His tone was exactly the same as it had been with every other candidate, no hint of judgment or dismissal, no indication that he had even noticed her footwear. Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope flicker back to life as she settled into her chair and prepared to make her case for why she deserved this position despite her torn shoes and worn suit. The interview that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her months of job searching. Marcus Chen asked probing, thoughtful questions that went far beyond the standard corporate interview script. He wanted to know about her problem-solving process, her approach to client relationships, her thoughts on industry trends and challenges. He asked about specific projects she had worked on, digging deep into her methodology and results. Most surprisingly, he asked about her background, her journey to this point, her perspective on overcoming obstacles and setbacks. Sarah found herself relaxing as the conversation continued, her passion for the work overriding her self-consciousness about her appearance. She spoke eloquently about her vision for client engagement, her innovative approaches to project management, her ability to build relationships and deliver results even in challenging circumstances. She shared specific examples of how she had turned around struggling accounts, how she had developed new processes that had become standard practice at her previous company, how she had mentored junior colleagues and contributed to a positive team culture. What struck Sarah most about the interview was how Marcus Chen listened, not just politely, but actively engaging with her ideas, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her thoughts and perspectives. He challenged her assumptions, pushed her to think more deeply about complex scenarios, but always in a way that felt collaborative rather than confrontational. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was being seen for her mind and her capabilities rather than being judged for her circumstances or appearance. As the interview concluded, Marcus Chen thanked her for her time and insights, giving no indication of his thoughts about her candidacy. Sarah shook hands with everyone at the table, trying to read their expressions for any hint of their impressions, but their professional demeanors revealed nothing. As she walked back through the waiting area, she could feel the eyes of the remaining candidates on her, some curious, others dismissive, all probably wondering how someone in torn shoes had managed to spend nearly an hour in the interview room. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Sarah returned to her small studio apartment, replaying every moment of the interview, analyzing every question and response, wondering if she had done enough to overcome the obvious disadvantage of her appearance. She knew she had performed well in the interview itself, had demonstrated her knowledge and capabilities, had connected with Marcus Chen on a professional level. But she also knew that in a competitive field of 33 highly qualified candidates, any perceived weakness could be the deciding factor. That evening, as Sarah sat in her apartment trying to distract herself with a book from the library, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Meridian Corp, and Sarah's heart began racing as she answered. It was Marcus Chen's assistant, calling to inform her that she had been selected for the position and asking if she could start the following Monday. Sarah was so stunned that she had to ask the assistant to repeat the information twice before she could fully process what she was hearing. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Meridian Corp to complete her paperwork and meet with her new team. As she walked through the lobby in the same torn shoes, now somehow feeling less ashamed of them, she encountered several of the candidates from the previous day's interviews. Their expressions ranged from surprise to confusion to barely concealed resentment, as they realized that the woman they had mocked and dismissed had been chosen over them. During her orientation meeting, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus Chen as he explained her role and responsibilities. Unable to contain her curiosity any longer, she asked him directly why he had chosen her despite her obvious lack of polish compared to the other candidates. His response would stay with her for the rest of her career. "Sarah," Marcus Chen said, leaning back in his chair with a slight smile, "I've been in business for 20 years, and I've learned that the best employees aren't always the ones who look the part from the beginning. When I saw those candidates in the waiting area yesterday, laughing and whispering about your shoes, I learned everything I needed to know about their character. They showed me that they were people who would judge colleagues and clients based on superficial characteristics, who would create exclusive rather than inclusive environments, who would prioritize appearance over substance." He continued, his expression becoming more serious. "But you showed me something different entirely. Despite knowing that you were being judged and mocked, you held your head high, conducted yourself with dignity, and gave one of the most impressive interviews I've conducted in years. You demonstrated resilience, authenticity, and the kind of character that can't be taught or bought. Those torn shoes told me that you understand struggle, that you don't give up when things get difficult, that you value opportunities and won't take success for granted." Marcus Chen's words hit Sarah like a revelation. Her greatest source of shame had actually been her greatest asset. not because of the shoes themselves, but because of how she had handled the situation they created. Her torn shoes had revealed her character in a way that no perfectly polished appearance could have done. They had shown her resilience, her determination, her ability to maintain professionalism and focus even when facing judgment and ridicule. The clients we serve, Marcus Chen concluded, come from all walks of life, and they need consultants who can understand their challenges, relate to their struggles, and provide solutions that work in the real world, not just in boardrooms and theoretical scenarios. Your background, your perspective, your understanding of what it means to fight for success. Those are exactly the qualities we need on our team. Sarah began her career at Meridian Corp. She kept those torn shoes in her closet as a reminder of the day that changed her life. Not because of their condition, but because of what they had taught her about judgment, character, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the true value in people. The other candidates had seen only worn leather and a visible tear, but Marcus Chen had seen determination, resilience, and authentic character that no amount of money could buy years later. As Sarah rose through the ranks at Meridian Corp and eventually started her own successful consulting firm, she would often share this story with young professionals facing their own struggles and setbacks. She would tell them that torn shoes, like any other external challenge or perceived weakness, only have the power to define you if you let them. What matters is not the judgments others make based on appearances, but how you respond to those judgments, how you carry yourself in the face of adversity, and whether you can maintain your integrity and professionalism even when others question your worth based on superficial characteristics.